My name is Rowan Kane. I'm 24 years old and a mother to a 3-month-old baby. I never imagined I'd be a single mom at this point in my life. But here I am, sitting in my cousin's apartment, trying to figure out what comes next. This wasn't the plan. After my breakup, I wanted to go back to my parents' house, where I thought I'd feel safe. But they didn't have room for me, or at least not for me and my baby. They didn't say it outright, but I understood. I acted like it was okay, told them I'd figure something out. And I did. My cousin Caleb offered to let me stay with him. He's 31 and lives alone in a modest 2-bedroom apartment. It's on the ground floor, not fancy or spacious, but enough for now. I didn't have many other options, so I packed up my things and moved in. I should feel grateful. Caleb didn't make it uncomfortable or awkward. He just said I could stay as long as I needed. He's even great with my baby, which is more helpful than I want to admit. But here's the truth. I feel like I'm carrying around a secret I can't outrun, a secret that makes me question everything. Because Caleb isn't just my cousin. 4 years ago, our family went on a trip to Italy, and that vacation changed everything. I remember arriving at the villa, unpacking, and heading out to explore the cobblestone streets. It was beautiful. Narrow alleyways, bustling markets, charming cafes tucked into corners. I should have been lost in all of that, but instead, I kept noticing Caleb. And worse, I noticed how others noticed him. He's always been attractive, but seeing the way girls would look at him made something inside me twist. They'd wear short dresses, toss their hair, and giggle, hoping to catch his attention. Sometimes he'd look back, and I hated it. I hated the way it made me feel invisible. Without realizing it, I started changing. My wardrobe became a little bolder, shorter skirts, lower necklines. I told myself it was for confidence, but deep down, I wanted him to see me. And when he didn't, I just tried harder. One night, everything boiled over. We were at a bar near the villa, and I'd had one too many glasses of wine. I saw him talking to 2 women, older, glamorous, the kind who exuded confidence. They were laughing, touching his arm, and something in me snapped. Some guy was buying me drinks, but I couldn't focus on him. All I could see was Caleb. So I marched over and pulled him aside. I don't remember exactly what I said, just that I was angry. Angry that he wasn't paying attention to me. He looked at me, smirked, and said, "You look good tonight." That was all it took. One compliment, and suddenly, the air between us shifted. Later that night, back at the villa, he kissed me. I didn't stop him. I didn't want to. We slept together, twice. And when the trip ended, we acted like it never happened. Back home, there were moments, quiet ones at family gatherings or late nights when no one else was around, where it felt like it might happen again. But it didn't. We buried it. I moved on. I dated other people, fell in love, and had a baby with a man who left the second things got hard. And now, somehow, I'm right back here. Living in Caleb's apartment, sleeping in his spare room, pretending everything is fine. But it's not. That tension is still there, hanging between us like a thread waiting to snap. Every time I catch him looking at me or see him holding my baby, I wonder if I'm lying to myself. I keep saying this is temporary, that I just need to get back on my feet, save some money, and leave. But deep down, I don't know if I really want to. The summer I turned 20, my family planned a 2-week trip to Spain. It was supposed to be the perfect getaway, city tours, sunny beaches, and endless sightseeing. I didn't expect it to change my life. I still remember stepping off the plane, feeling groggy from the flight, and spotting Caleb at the baggage claim. He looked different, more self-assured, like he'd grown into himself in a way I hadn't noticed before. His hair was cropped shorter, and his shoulders seemed broader. Women noticed too. It started the moment we got to the hotel. A group of girls in sundresses lingered in the lobby, stealing glances at him. On the streets, women's heads turned as we passed. I told myself I was just being protective. It's what cousins do. But that wasn't the truth. By the 3rd day, I was tired of pretending it didn't bother me. I started dressing differently, swapping jeans for skirts, and loose shirts for tops that hugged my figure. When I caught Caleb's eyes lingering on me for a moment too long, something inside me shifted. One afternoon, we were at a museum, wandering through quiet halls. I leaned over a display case to get a better look, and when I glanced up, I saw him watching me. He looked away quickly, but not quickly enough. That single moment made me feel powerful in a way I wasn't used to. That night at the hotel bar, the dynamic between us changed. I'd had a couple of cocktails, enough to feel bold. Caleb sat at the bar with two older women, their laughter too loud, their hands too familiar. I kept telling myself it didn't matter, but the knot in my stomach said otherwise. Some guy was buying me drinks, but I barely noticed him. I was too busy stealing glances at Caleb, waiting for him to look my way. He didn't, and something inside me snapped. I walked over, grabbed Caleb's arm, and pulled him aside. "I don't like this," I said. My voice was sharp, but I wasn't even sure what I meant. He laughed at first, then his expression softened. "You've been turning heads all night," he said, and the way he said it sent a shiver down my spine. Before I could respond, the guy who'd been buying me drinks appeared. He grabbed my arm, trying to pull me back toward the bar. Caleb didn't hesitate. He stepped between us, his voice calm but firm. "Let her go," he said. The guy shoved Caleb, and for a moment, I thought things would escalate. But Caleb didn't flinch. The guy backed down, muttering something under his breath as he walked away. When it was just the two of us again, the air felt different. Thick, charged. I don't know what came over me after that. Maybe it was the adrenaline, or maybe it was the way Caleb looked at me, like I was the only person in the room. We went back to my room. I changed into pajamas, and before I could second-guess myself, he kissed me. It started slow, tentative, like we were both testing the waters. But neither of us stopped. We slept together twice that night. The next morning, we didn't talk about it. We went back to being cousins, sightseeing like nothing had happened. But the air between us was heavier after that. Every glance felt loaded. Every accidental touch lingered. When we got home, the secret stayed between us. There were no promises, no admissions that it was a mistake. We just acted like it didn't happen. But it lingered. The first family gathering after the trip felt surreal. Seeing Caleb across the room, laughing with his brother like nothing had changed, made me question everything. I tried to act normal, but my eyes kept finding him. And Caleb noticed. It started small, catching my eye across the table and smirking like we shared a secret, brushing my arm as he walked by, standing a little too close when no one else was around. Once, at a barbecue, I was alone in the kitchen arranging food when Caleb walked in. He stood behind me, close enough that I could feel his breath on my neck. "You good?" he asked. I nodded, but my hands trembled. He reached past me for a plate, his arm brushing against mine. It felt deliberate. My skin burned where he touched me, and I hated how much I wanted him to do it again. We never crossed the line after that, but those moments, the stolen glances, the fleeting touches, kept me up at night. I told myself it didn't matter, that what happened in Spain was just a mistake. Eventually, I met someone. It wasn't love, not really, but it was easy. I thought I could move on, and when I found out I was pregnant, I thought I'd finally left it all behind. But Caleb never faded completely. When I told Caleb I was pregnant, he congratulated me, but his eyes said something else. I didn't ask what. And now, after everything, here I am in his apartment. 4 years may have passed, but sometimes it feels like no time at all. Moving in with Caleb was like stepping into a storm I wasn't prepared for. The first night, I sat on the edge of the unfamiliar bed in his spare room, rocking my baby to sleep. I tried to focus on her tiny breaths and not on the sound of Caleb's voice, faint through the wall as he talked to someone on the phone. His slow, deliberate footsteps reminded me of the limp he hadn't fully recovered from. I told myself this arrangement was temporary, a few months, maybe less. Just enough time to find a job and save for my own place. That's what I told him too. He didn't argue, just handed me a key and said, "Stay as long as you need." But being here brought everything back. I didn't expect Caleb to be so good with my daughter. The first time he held her, she nestled into him like she belonged there. He joked about her liking him more than me, and I laughed, but it hit me harder than I wanted to admit. He made things too easy. He'd help with late-night feedings when I needed rest, fold laundry without being asked, and somehow always knew when I was teetering on the edge of breaking down. One evening, after hours of failed job applications and rejection emails, I walked into the living room to find him on the couch with my baby asleep on his chest. The TV was on, but he wasn't watching it. He just sat there, gently brushing her tiny hand with his fingers. For a second, I let myself imagine it. The three of us as a family. Then I hated myself for even thinking it. Caleb wasn't hers. He wasn't mine. The guilt gnawed at me, but it didn't stop the thoughts. Every time he brushed past me in the kitchen or touched my shoulder in passing, my skin felt like it was on fire. And the way he sometimes looked at me, like he was remembering too, made it all harder to ignore. I kept reminding myself that Caleb wasn't the same as he had been when I met him in Spain. The accident had changed him. A drunk driver ran a red light a year before I moved in, hitting him head-on. He'd broken his hip and leg, and the concussion had left him struggling for months. He still walked with a limp, and the pain sometimes slowed him down, though he never let it show for long. Once, I came home to find him on the couch, struggling to lift a box of baby supplies I'd ordered. "Let me help," I said, reaching for it. "I've got it," he grumbled, wincing as he tried to shift his weight. "Caleb," I said, crossing my arms. He sighed, finally letting go of the box. "Fine, but don't tell anyone. I've got a reputation to protect." I smiled, and for a moment, it felt too easy, too natural. Later that night, after my baby had fallen asleep, I found myself sitting next to him on the couch. Neither of us spoke at first, and then he looked at me. "You're doing good," he said softly. "With her, with everything." I wanted to believe him, but the way he said it, the way he looked at me, made my chest tighten. The tension started creeping back in after that, slowly at first. His hand brushing against my lower back as he passed me in the hallway, lingering looks when he thought I wouldn't notice. And then there were the comments. "You're amazing with her," he said one evening as I rocked my baby to sleep. "I don't know how you do it." I froze, forcing a smile. "You get used to it." But he didn't let it go. "No, I mean it. You're stronger than you think." His words stuck with me, circling in my head long after he left the room. And then came the jealousy. Caleb wasn't subtle about women, late-night texts, smirks at his phone. The first time I saw him leave the apartment dressed up, it hit me harder than I expected. "Where are you going?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Grabbing drinks," he said, slipping on his jacket. "I won't be late." I nodded, pretending not to care. But when the door closed behind him, I felt sick. When he came back, his shirt was wrinkled, and his hair looked like someone had run their fingers through it. He smiled at me, tired, and asked if the baby had been good. I wanted to ask about the girl. Instead, I said goodnight and went to my room. The tension kept building after that. It was in the way he adjusted a strand of hair that had fallen into my face, or the way his hand brushed mine when he passed me something. Once, I caught him staring. He didn't say anything, just smiled softly before looking away. I knew then that I wasn't imagining it. The lines were blurring. It happened one night when everything felt too heavy. The baby had been crying for hours, and nothing I did seemed to help. I paced the apartment until my back ached, and my legs felt like they might give out. When Caleb came home, I was on the verge of tears. He took one look at me and didn't say a word. He just reached for the baby. "She probably just needs a change," he said calmly. I handed her over and collapsed onto the couch. When he finally settled her in the bassinet, he sat beside me. "You're not alone," he said, his voice soft but firm. And then it happened. One moment, his hand was brushing away a tear I hadn't noticed, and the next, he was kissing me. I should have stopped him. I didn't. It wasn't soft or hesitant. It was desperate, like we couldn't stop even if we tried. For a moment, it felt like everything else disappeared. But then it hit me. I pulled back, my breathing unsteady. "This is wrong," I whispered. Caleb didn't move. "I know," he said, his voice strained. But when he reached for my hand, I didn't pull away. I told myself I would. But when his fingers laced through mine, it felt too safe, too familiar. And just like that, the walls I'd spent years building came crashing down. "You're absolutely right. Thanks for catching that inconsistency. I'll adjust the names and ensure everything stays cohesive moving forward. I'll revert Kendrick back to Caleb to match the earlier refined parts and keep all the edits aligned. Let me rewrite this portion for clarity and consistency. We didn't talk about it, not about what it meant or what we were supposed to do now." I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him, his hands, his mouth, the way he looked at me when it was over. And the worst part, I wanted more. Even as the guilt clawed at my chest, twisting my stomach into tight, unbearable knots, I still wanted more. The next morning, I woke with a hollow feeling. Caleb wasn't in the apartment. My daughter was still asleep, her tiny breath soft and steady, but everything else felt wrong. The air was heavy, pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't shake. My lips still tingled. My skin still burned, where his hands had lingered the night before. But underneath it all was this sick churn in my gut. What the hell had I done? I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my trembling hands. It all replayed in my mind on an endless loop. The kiss, the way it spiraled, the way I didn't stop. I told myself it was a moment of weakness, just emotions running high. I was vulnerable. He was comforting me. It got out of hand, that was all. But I knew better. When Caleb came home later that morning, I felt it immediately, the tension. He walked in and said, "Hey," like nothing had happened. But his voice was off, and his eyes betrayed him. He was nervous. I kept my head down, folding baby clothes, pretending to focus on anything but him. "Morning," I mumbled. "Did she sleep okay?" "Yeah." And that was it. We didn't say another word about it. The next few days were a blur. I threw myself into taking care of my daughter, feeding her, cleaning, rocking her to sleep. Anything to keep my mind busy. Caleb gave me space, but it didn't help. If anything, it made it worse. Every time we crossed paths, even briefly, it was there. The tension, the guilt, and that damn undercurrent of longing I couldn't shake. I started thinking about leaving, packing up whatever I could fit into my bag, and going anywhere else. But where? My parents' place was still out of the question, and I didn't have nearly enough saved to rent on my own. And then there was my daughter. She needed stability, not a mom running from her problems. So I stayed. Staying meant trying to ignore the way Caleb struggled to act normal. It also meant meeting his girlfriend. Her name was Lillian Chavez. She wasn't officially his girlfriend, not yet, but it was obvious that she wanted to be. She came over one evening, all long legs and perfect hair, with takeout in hand and a laugh that echoed too loud in the small apartment. I hated her immediately. It wasn't fair to hate her. She didn't do anything wrong. She was nice, too nice. She asked about my daughter, offered to help, and complimented my outfit like we were old friends. But the whole time, her eyes flicked between me and Caleb like she was trying to piece something together. And maybe she did. Maybe she noticed the way Caleb stiffened when I walked into the room, or how he avoided looking at me when she was around. And maybe I hated her most of all because she had every right to be there. Later that night, after she left, Caleb knocked on my door. "Can we talk?" I shook my head. "Not tonight." He hesitated, then nodded and walked away. I wanted to cry, but I didn't. Instead, I sat in the dark, staring at my baby and wondering how I had let things get this bad. It all came crashing down faster than I thought it would. Lillian showed up unannounced one afternoon, all smiles and sugary sweetness, but her eyes told a different story. Caleb wasn't home, just me and the baby. She stood at the door, holding a plastic bag filled with baby clothes. "I saw these and thought of her," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. I forced a smile and took the bag. "That's really thoughtful." "Of course," she replied, her eyes scanning the apartment. "I just wanted to check in, make sure you're okay." The way she said it made my stomach twist. "I'm fine." She leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "You and Caleb seem close." I froze. "What's that supposed to mean?" She tilted her head, her smile sharp now. "I'm not stupid, Brooklyn." I opened my mouth to defend myself, but nothing came out. "Look, I don't know what's going on between you two, but whatever it is, it's not fair. Not to me, not to your baby." Her words hit like a slap. I wanted to scream at her, tell her she didn't know anything about me or my life, but the truth sat heavy in my chest. She wasn't wrong. She stepped closer. "You need to figure out what you want. But if you think I'm just going to sit back and let you ruin Caleb's life, you're wrong." I didn't say anything. I couldn't. When she left, the apartment felt smaller, like the walls were closing in. I spent the rest of the day avoiding Caleb, but by the time the baby fell asleep, I knew I couldn't keep running from this. I found him in the living room, sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone. He looked up when I walked in, his expression unreadable. "We need to talk," I said. He nodded and set his phone down. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then it all came out. I told him everything, how I couldn't stop thinking about France, how being here with him made it impossible to move on, how I hated myself for wanting him even when I knew it was wrong. By the time I finished, my hands were shaking. Caleb didn't look away. "I feel it too," he said quietly. Those 4 words knocked the air out of me. "But I don't know what to do," he admitted. "You're my cousin, Brooklyn. We're not supposed to feel this way." I sat down beside him, my heart pounding. "So what now?" He shook his head, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know." We sat there in silence, the weight of it all pressing down on us. "I can't lose you," I said finally. "You won't," he said, but his voice was strained. I wanted to believe him, but the truth was, there wasn't an easy answer. We could keep pretending, acting like nothing happened, but that wouldn't make it go away. Or we could walk away completely, cut ties, even if it shattered me. Or we could do the unthinkable, be together and risk everything. I sat awake that night, staring at the ceiling while my baby slept soundly in the bassinet beside me. My mind kept replaying the conversation with Caleb, his words, my words. The weight of it all felt unbearable. He felt it too. That should have made me feel better, but it didn't. If anything, it made it worse, because now I knew I wasn't crazy. It wasn't just me, but knowing didn't make it any easier. I thought about my daughter, the tiny person who needed me more than anyone ever had. She didn't ask for this mess. She didn't deserve to be dragged into my chaos. I couldn't keep doing this. The next morning, Caleb was already in the kitchen when I walked in. He looked up, and for a second, we just stared at each other. I broke the silence first. "I can't." He set down his coffee mug. "Can't what?" "This!" My voice cracked. "I can't keep pretending it's not there. But I also can't let it ruin everything." He didn't speak right away, and I hated the look on his face, the hurt mixed with something else. Acceptance, maybe. "I get it," he said finally. I felt my chest tighten. "Do you?" He nodded. "You're right. Your baby comes first." I swallowed hard, fighting the tears threatening to spill. "And you need someone who isn't this." He didn't argue. He just stepped closer, resting his hand lightly on my arm. "I'm still here, Brooklyn. I'm not going anywhere." His words were supposed to make me feel better, but they only made it harder. I stepped back, creating space between us, even though it hurt to do it. I need time to figure myself out, to figure out what this is. He didn't fight it. He just nodded, his jaw tight. For the next few weeks, we kept things surface level. He still helped with the baby, still checked on me. But the touches stopped. The lingering glances faded. We acted like nothing had ever happened. But some nights, after the baby was asleep, I'd find myself lying in bed, wondering if it was really over, or if it was just paused. Because the truth was, Caleb wasn't just my past. He was still in my present. And I wasn't sure if I'd ever be ready to let him go completely. Thank you so much for sticking with me through this story. If it resonated with you or made you feel something, please take a moment to like this video. It helps more than you know. And if you think someone else might need to hear this, share it. Sometimes, stories like this can be the push someone needs to start healing. Also, don't forget to subscribe. There are more stories like this, real, raw, and honest, and I'd love for you to be here for the next one.